I think it's my turn. Good morning, everyone. My name is Beaves-Fisher, and I'm going to be a little more practical, I think, in my approach this morning, and I hope that's okay. I'm going to start by just saying I avoided allowing my churches to become reconciling because I have spent so much of my time in the closet. Um, and the idea of moving a church towards inclusion put a target on my back and in our community. And so I want to just briefly share what happened with the church after I left and moved to the Mountain Sky Annual Conference. The church took a vote to become a reconciling church within almost 3 months of me leaving that congregation. And immediately a giant rainbow flag went out in the yard, and they were so excited to celebrate that. And about 2 months later, my husband or fiance and I at the time began to plan our wedding and decided that that church was really important to us, and we wanted to have our wedding there. When we called to schedule our wedding, of course, that was great. They were so excited, but we had to have awkward conversations about whether the administrative council would approve them doing gay weddings. And just because I was an associate, I didn't have special privileges and all those types of things that rolled over. And I expected that, but what I didn't expect was the lack of practical thought that went into making an inclusive church. When Adam and I asked for the paperwork to get our wedding put down, the first question asked for the bride's name. With no thought that if they're going to start doing weddings for people in same-sex unions that look differently than traditional weddings, perhaps our forms have to change. The next thing they did was show us the bridal room and asked which one of us wanted to be in the bridal room to prepare for the wedding. And I thought about that a lot in the way that I think about, so oftentimes that flag on the outside of our building becomes the symbol that we almost idolatrize, as opposed to thinking about the ways that we practically and systematically create an inclusive church beyond that. I've learned a lot of lessons as I serve in the local church as well. And first, and most importantly, is that churches that say that they're prepared to receive a queer person, I often think maybe, in my experience, are prepared intellectually, but they're not prepared experientially. They're not prepared for the first time that a death threat comes in on the office phone or letters come to the mailbox. They're not prepared to have conversations about what it would look like to insure your spouse in a same-sex couple. Even my church debated that they would give Adam insurance or offer insurance to my spouse because if he was a woman and of childbearing age, that would be important to them. And since he was young, they also think that he should have insurance, right? And so I've really had to understand what it means for us to be intellectually engaged with being inclusive and what it means to experientially understand diversity in the context of our church. I also didn't realize what it means from a queer perspective to have to educate and be vulnerable all the time. To pour my heart out, to be honest about the things that I experience and what that does for leadership within the church. And that idea that oftentimes the congregation wants to then become your supporter and your caretaker. And that's not the role that we want to put ourselves in leading a congregation. I also was unprepared for the way that the majority straight culture would respond to traumatic events. A couple of years ago, over Thanksgiving weekend, some people threw rocks into the front windows of our church. And our churches have been broken into before for hate crimes. And so immediately the congregation boiled up with this trauma and this trigger of what was happening to them, again, as being a target for being an inclusive church in the community. What was also really apparent in this whole conversation was that nothing was ever discussed about security and safety moving forward. I now serve in a church where I have bear spray in my pulpit. We have bear spray in our hosting cabinet. We do all kinds of different things with security. We invite the cops into our church on a regular basis. And these are all steps that are really great, but also really expensive for the local church. And I don't know if local churches always understand that by committing to be an inclusive church, especially in a context where I serve in Billings, Montana, that security and safety is both a perception and a reality. We have to make people feel safe, and we have to make sure that people are safe. And this is a struggle that we see, especially when we're working with a juvenile population. I think one of the other things that is really important to pay attention to is the way that we tokenize versus ask people to share their expertise. When I arrived in Billings, I immediately got a ton of invitations to be a speaker. And what I realized was I was the first gay pastor any of them had ever encountered. And so they wanted to learn from me, but more than anything, they wanted to put me on a stage and allow me to perform for them. It wasn't until I was on the ground for a while that I really understood which organizations were looking for expertise and growing in inclusion and understanding, and helping my church also understand that there are reasons why I say no to certain public engagements and reasons that I say yes to certain public engagements because of that. I'm blessed to serve at a church that over 10 years ago became a reconciling church in Eastern Montana, and immediately started a queer youth group with no function of the church around that. No Jesus talk, no religion. It is simply by the posture that we present in the community that we show who Jesus is. And in this work, one of the things that we've been able to see and understand is the way that we as a church need to grow in our trusting relationships just in general, right? The lessons that we learn about being inclusive with the queer population are the same that we should be doing with people with accessibility issues, or who are neurodivergent, or people who are of a different race or ethnicity, right? It is about building trust and relationship. Over the years, our queer youth group has grown to have lots of different functions. We have a clinical team of 5 people who are just there so that at any point in time, our youth can go and talk with a therapist. You see, the problem is, though, at Rainbow, over 2/3 of our kids identify that it would be unsafe to come out at home. When they come to Rainbow, they tell their families they're coming to church youth group. And the work that we do in Rainbow Coffee House often skirts some boundaries and lines that the traditional church would not find appropriate. We need to normalize sexual ethics within the queer community, appropriate for their age. We need to talk about ethical storytelling and the way that we advocate for ourselves. And most importantly, we do not provide a hope-filled future that is not a reality yet, because they need to understand the risk that they are taking when they step out into our communities. Right? We do that work in lots of different ways, but the content matters. And we've actually been more burned by members of the church than anything. Coming to a session and hearing about STDs and sexual acts that pertain only to the queer community immediately set members of our volunteer off. And the next thing I knew at coffee hour, the rumor was we were watching porn at Rainbow Coffee House. Right? And so we've had to be really careful about who we include in those spaces. Our board today is now made up of queer people from the community that have no religious understanding, and a diverse group of people from the church that come in, and community members, and even neighbors who just see the kids gather every week and want them to know that there's a safe space there. We also have experienced within the community issues where oftentimes where we ask for an off-duty officer to be present, no one signs up. Or when it did experience damage to our building, our mayor actually in our history paid for our security system, but then voted no on the non-discrimination ordinance in our community, right? And so ways that we engage with our community and the ways that we enter into the political system in our community has shifted a lot as well. I also want to talk about the work of doing queer adult ministries. I often tell people that I have a very orthodox theology, and people don't always expect that from me because I'm pretty socially progressive. And when I started doing work in the community, I had almost 3 people a week reaching out for spiritual counseling. They were often 50-plus-year-old men who were committed in heterosexual marriage, who identified as gay and were struggling. Immediately we thought, oh, we should start a group where we get all these people together and they start to do that. And as I started to play around with that more and understood the culture, right, I was afraid that immediately that would become a hookup place. that people would find somebody else that they identified with, that shared in their struggle, and that then we would be kind of leaning away from our Christian understandings of our relationships in covenant marriage. And so we decided to open that group up even more. And now every month, all we do is we start at the beginning of L and we move through G, T, B, T, Q, I, A plus. And whoever is represented in that group that night shares their coming out stories. We compare, we ask questions like, why do they always make U-Haul jokes about lesbians? What's up with Home Depot? Why are there so many tribe names for gay men, right? And we share that space. And I want to talk about what that's done for our community. A couple of weeks ago, members of the group invited me to their birthday party, and we went axe throwing, of all things. If you know anything about me, this was my pure version of hell on earth. And following that, we were sitting at dinner, and finally one of the other guests just looked across the table and asked the birthday person, what's up with the pastor? Like, why is he here? And it took that person literally just a second to say, you know, Sam may be a pastor, but he cares about the queer community, and he has welcomed me and my family in, and he is providing safe space for my kids. And we go to his house every month and we share our personal experiences. Note that we meet in my house, not the church, because the church is often the threshold that our queer community will not cross. And we don't have to be church in a building. So as we continue to do this work, I invite you to think about the ways that you're building trust within the queer community and paying attention to the very practical things. Ask your office what their paperwork looks like for weddings. Maybe change the name of the bridal suite that you have in your church where the bride gets married, right? Pay attention to those things. It's not about having a flag plastered on the side of the wall. It is about truly thinking about ways that we include all people. And then I would say, as another point of this, that we are only as good as we are when we are bringing all inclusive in. And so for my church, decentering LGBTQ voices and raising BIPOC voices and raising ADA voices and all of the understandings and recognizing that the work is messy. It is always messy as we're doing it, but it is also really exciting to learn more and understand perspectives in a different way. I look forward to answering any questions you have later on. Thank you.